All right, guys, we're going to go ahead and get started today. So thank you for joining us here today. We're going to talk about bank on cybersecurity, protecting financial services from harm. So we're all going to talk all about the cybersecurity threats that are facing the financial services industry, as well as some ways those threats can be addressed. If you guys can go to the next slide. And my name's Steven Selgrade. I am just your MC today. Real quickly here, I'm going to kick it off to the really smart folks. So we have Chad Graham. He's actually a senior forensic engineer here at Critical Start. And then he's going to be followed up by Carrie Spearman, one of our senior security consultants. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Chad, to talk about some of these threats we're seeing.
Great, thank you, Stephen. I tried to start my video, but it says it's still disabled. But yes, I'm glad to be here today to speak with you all. Today, we're just going to talk about some of the threat landscape for the financial sector, some of the risks that are out there, and then some of the things that can be done to help mitigate these risks and prevent an incident or a breach. So threats to financial services companies are number 2 right now for the total cost of a cyber attack. First being healthcare. So I guess that's good news for the financial sector. But the average cost in US dollars is 5.72 million for a cyber attack in the financial sector. So big money there. The average total cost of a data breach in 2020 in the financial sector was only 5.85 million. Was 5.85 million. So more good news is, I guess the cost is going down a whopping $0.13 million. So good news there. These numbers come from the IBM 2021 cost of a data breach report. Highly recommend that be reviewed. Lots of great information in there. So current threats right now in the financial sector include email misdelivery, which represents 55% of the financial sector errors. This is just a typo in an email. It's usually not intentional. These threats are more internal and are not external facing. But when we start discussing external threat actors, the financial industry really is still facing a high number of attacks, including credential attacks, phishing, and ransomware attacks. And this is normally on par with the other industries as well. The number 1 attack vector is email. In 2021, 84% of all attacks were through email. So email filtering is one of the number 1 safeguards that an organization can take to help prevent an incident or a breach and help mitigate attack surface. And then personal data comes in first when we talk about the type of data that has been breached or is included in these incidents, followed by credentials. So your Microsoft account credentials or any kind of software credentials or service credentials. And then lastly, the bank data, such as the routing numbers and account numbers and things like that. So one of the biggest risk right now to the financial sector is the Trickbot malware. It's a botnet and banking Trojan that targets the financial sector and banking industry specifically. It focuses on the Windows operating system, and it's continuously being updated and enhanced with new capabilities by the threat actors that have written it and maintained it. It can be distributed by being downloaded via a website or delivered via email in an Excel Word document or Microsoft Excel document, which makes it extremely flexible, customizable, and why it is so dangerous. In 2021, it served as a popular means for initial access and targeted attacks, followed by malware. So Trickbot was deployed, and then that would download malware such as Ryuk, Conti, or Bazaar. And then in May 2021, the Conti group actually ransomed Ireland's health service executive, or the HSE, for $20 million. and initial access was found to be through a phishing email that contained that Trickbot malware. While HSE did not pay the ransom, it did still pay. Its CEO, Paul Reed, told an Irish government health committee that the immediate costs were around 100 million euros, but that ultimately they forecasted their total cost to exceed over 500 million euros. At the first of the year, Trickbot, as of the first of the year, Trickbot is the most prevalent botnet globally. Every country, it is the #1 botnet and banking Trojan that is existing right now. There's also Cubot or Quackbot, which is a banking malware. And while it was initially designed to collect banking credentials and keystrokes, it has also since grown. It is now being used by ransomware operators to become part of a botnet and then drop malware on infected devices. Same thing, usually delivered in Excel documents with macros enabled. And this is, once again, all coming through phishing emails. So that's where phishing emails are, why phishing emails are the #1 threat right now, not just in the financial sector alone, but overall. So late last year, Cubot was actually observed delivering the Conti ransomware, and the average demand that Conti was demanding was $4.6 million last year for people that wanted to pay to receive their data back. Lastly, there's also the Drydex banking malware, which is information stealing and also a botnet. Late last year, it was observed spreading in a phishing campaign. So once again, we're talking about phishing, and was also in an Excel document with macros enabled. And then in December, Drydex was also one of the first malwares to be distributed using the Log4j vulnerability. So that was very interesting to see. Now you take these risks, you take these vulnerabilities, you take everything that we know out there, and you try to put it together. And well, how does this affect me? Well, luckily, in that same report I mentioned earlier, the IBM Cost of a Data Breach report, there was a case study that was done. So I wanted to talk about that real quick. The IBM Case Study in 2021 presented a financial sector model that it used, and it utilized industry data and threat intelligence combined with the FAIR cyber risk model. That's the factor analysis of information risk. And this hypothetical scenario analyzed the risk associated with a malicious external actor, so like a ransomware gang, gaining access to a sensitive database inside of a bank and using ransomware to halt the operations and extort the organization by threatening to expose the stolen data. So here you see the scope as an external actor with malicious intent using ransomware, and they gain access to a database containing PII or privileged or private information, identifiable information. And that basically means that there's a loss of confidentiality, and this becomes not just an incident, but an actual breach. The direct loss is the cost of the response time. So your average response time for this is 50 to 150 hours. And the average wage is $75 an hour to $150 an hour for all of those hours. And then an average breach would have 500,000 to 100 million records in a database that would be breached, with 75 to 100% of those being either PII or PCI, and maybe even 10 to 25% of that being intellectual property. So big risk there. Now, when we try to quantify that risk of a specific bank being hit by the ransomware, there's a 30% probability that the event occurring, given that bank's strong security controls. So this is even factoring in that banks have stronger than average security controls. Keep that in mind, that the average financial loss for a bank being hit by this type of scenario would be $18.9 million total. That's composed of the response cost, the lost business, and the regulatory fines. So big losses even as an average. The top end loss, the most the bank would expect to lose, would be closer to $60 million. That's over 1 million records being breached and exported out, things like that. And then a bank that did it right, that was on top of the response, their security posture was very, very strong, even above other banks, you could expect around a $3.6 million loss total. So even the minimum loss expected is still more than any organization is going to want to pay out. This cost of the average 18.9 million is broken out with around 5 million in fines, 10.5 million worth of lost business and reputation harm, and 3.3 million on the response procedures as a whole, which includes your response team, your technology, all that type of stuff. So how can you protect yourself, or how can financial institutions protect themselves when facing these types of risks, these types of costs? Well, there's an old adage in the security industry that compliance does not equal security. I'm not sure who specifically said that. It's been thrown around for quite a while, so just some smart cybersecurity elder probably. But what will go a long way to help somebody is not just focusing on the compliance, such as PCI or any of those, but actually having a strong cybersecurity program. A strong cybersecurity program will get you most of the way to compliance. For instance, if you were to follow the Center for Internet Security Critical Security Controls, they have 18 actionable items that really help to strengthen an organization's cybersecurity posture. These include doing a full asset inventory, both physical assets and software, documenting all the network connections, monitoring these connections, having email filtering and controls in place, having strong password policies, having multi-factor authentication. All these types of things are included in these 18 actionable items that really go a long way towards compliance as well. If you were to implement all 18 actionable items from the CSC, you would be somewhere around 80 to 85% towards PCI compliance, with the last 15% being small things that really don't cost many money. The technology's already been taken care of, so it'd just be a hop, skip, and a jump to not only be secure, but also be compliant. There's also the NIST 853 security controls. As stated on their website, these controls provide a catalog of security and privacy controls for information systems and organizations that protect an organization's operations and assets, individuals, other organizations, and the nation from diverse sets of threats and risks, including those of hostile attacks, human errors, natural disasters, structural failures, foreign intelligence entities, and privacy risk. I have put links to these here so they can be reviewed. But basically, all this is saying is that if you were to pick a security framework and you were to actually invest in the implementation of this framework to its strongest factor, that you wouldn't need to worry about, are you compliant and are you secure, because they would go hand in hand. Whereas if you just follow the steps necessary for a PCI compliance, you're leaving big holes in your security posture, things that the compliance doesn't look at, because compliance doesn't look at security. Compliance looks at the data and the safety of the data, and not security as a whole. And it doesn't really take into account human error and all these other things. So all this being said is that really any financial institution, no matter the size, isn't going to want to pay an average of a $20 million payout for a cybersecurity incident, or much less a big incident that may take up to $60 million. So taking the time to invest in your cybersecurity program is going to pay off in the long haul. As that same CEO of the Irish Health Exchange said, companies can either invest a little bit of money upfront over time, or they can invest a greater amount all at once when a security incident or data breach happens. That's really all I have for today. So we can kick it over to Carrie and see how that might play into MDR and other security controls that might be offered.
Thank you, Chad. I think, Carrie, you can go ahead.
There you go. Sorry about that. I hit the wrong button. So let me see. I'm not sure how this thing works. How do I share? Okay, there we go. Share screen. And let me do this one. All right. Can you see my screen?
We can.
And I'll start the video so you can see my beautiful face and my Cooper Hawk behind me. So that's actually, I took that in Wyoming, that picture. So, you know, Chad, one of the interesting attacks on financial institutions that I heard about a few years ago, I don't know if you're familiar with this, but there was a hacker group that was able to access an ATM environment, and they then put in this program that would, at a very specific time of day, you could go in and punch out a code, and it would basically empty out all of the cash of the ATM machine. So what they did was they hired hundreds of people to go to various ATM machines. And this, I think this was in South Korea or Japan, I can't remember which one, but they hired all these people to go to the ATM, punch in the number and empty the machine, and then take it to a drop point. And I was like, wow, that was a really clever attack. But what I'm going to talk about today is a piece of what you can do, you know, based on what Chad was talking about, right? So if you go through those security controls, and if you start to develop that, one of the things it's going to be is monitoring your environment. And so this is a key piece, and this is where Critical Start can help. One of the things that you'll need in order to monitor your environment is you have to go out and purchase some tools, right? So those tools might be things like an endpoint detect and respond tool, or a SIM, are two common tools that people use, and those are tools that we work with, right? So if you're familiar with either one of these types of tools, what you probably know to be true is that they are going to produce a lot of alerts. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is because that's the job of the tool. You want it to produce alerts. You want it to look at your environment and say, hey, this is potentially something bad, right? So this is something that we would advise you look at. So actually, in that sense, a tool that produces more alerts is good. The problem is that, you know, a lot of those alerts that are going to be produced are false positive, because from a tool level, it's hard to tell the difference between good behavior that looks suspicious and actually bad behavior that looks suspicious, right? So that's always going to be a problem. And certainly the threat actors are going to be familiar with these tools as well. And so they will use these, you know, high numbers of alerts to, you know, to create their tactics and techniques to kind of fly under the radar. So one of the things that we typically see in the world, and this can be whether it's done by a third party, so you hire someone to say, help us with all these alerts, or you know, you hire people internally to build your own SOC and say, you know, deal with all these alerts. One of the things we see is what we call the input oriented approach. And basically this is tuning, right? So you see an alert that you get continuously, and that alert is consistently false positive. And you say, okay, well, we're going to tune out this alert because it alerts, you know, 1,000 times a week, and we know it's a false positive, right? And so we see that. The problem with that approach is you're assuming that each time you get that alert, that everything is the same, that nothing has changed, nothing in your environment's changed, nothing about that alert has changed, and you risk you know, something happening, and that's an unqualified risk. And so at Critical Start, we don't like that, right? So we want to find a way to get around that. The other piece that you see, and this is very prevalent when you reach out to a third party to say, hey, help me with my alerts, right? They're going to say, well, the medium and the low alerts don't really matter. What we're going to do is focus on the critical and high alerts. And sometimes they might say, and by the way, we also do weekly threat hunting. And so kind of what they're saying is, we know that some of those medium alerts can be, can be real, can be of value, can be real threats. So we're going to occasionally look at those medium alerts, but really our focus is on the criticals and highs. And I'm going to show you an example of how that can be a problem. So this is actually a real example that we saw that was associated, with the Ragnar lock bit, right? So what happens is, over a 32-day period, this client sees a series of low and medium alerts, and they get this compromise. So what actually happened in this case is, there was an organization, a threat group, who was able to get initial access into the environment, right? Once they had that persistent access, they sold the access to the highest bidder on the dark web. And so another threat group comes in and they take that access and they start moving around, the organization. They start figuring out how they're going to create their plan of attack, and they're consistently, shooting off those low and medium alerts, and they know that they're doing that. They're not expected. They just have this high probability that no one's going to notice, right? And so when they get to what the actual target of what they're going to do, and that's the lockdown of the environment, that's when the critical alert gets triggered. And maybe if you react really quickly to that alert, and you know exactly what it is, and you know exactly what to do, you could prevent this attack from just looking at the critical alert. But the chances of that happening are very, very slim. In this case, it's a full breach, a full lockdown, right? And you're going to have to call an incident response team to come in and help that. So that's why we don't leave these low and medium alerts to chance. What we do is we resolve every alert. And the process that we do with that is we take inputs from your SIM, from your EDR, EPP. So, and if you don't have all of these, right, some clients just have an EDR or just have a SIM per se. And so again, EDR would be your endpoint detect and response. EPP would be your traditional like antivirus, right? And then SIM would be that, that point where you collect logs from different places. So we ingest all of that information, and we do that by tapping into those tools. So we're not putting, more equipment in your environment, right? We're not spinning up any virtual devices. We're not, sending you a server that sits in the middle of your environment. What we're doing is we're actually using API connections to reach out to your SIM, to reach out to your EDR and say, this is the information that we need, right? So we ingest all of that. It comes along, and then we're going to remove any prioritization. Right. So where it's going to say critical, medium, high, we don't care, because we're going to look at everything. And the next step, it goes through what's called our trusted behavior registry. And I'm going to talk a little bit more in depth about the trusted behavior registry. But in this point, the key to remember is it's going to look at those alerts and say, is this alert a trusted behavior? Is it a false positive, or is it something that needs to be looked at deeper? And if it can identify it as trusted behavior, then it's going to automatically close that alert. If it can't, what's going to happen is it's going to go to our SOC, right? So I'm going to anticipate your next question, and your next question should be, well, what's the difference between the trusted behavior registry saying this is trusted and us just tuning out an alert, right? If we know that this alert is probably, most likely false positive, how is the trusted behavior any different than that, right? So what we do is we actually break down the anatomy of an alert, and we say, what are the components that the the platform, the tool alerted on that makes them think that this could be an alert. And then we differentiate between how we know that this can be a false positive versus it can be, potentially a threat. So let me give you an example of that. If you were to go on your computer right now and you had any of the major, endpoint detection response tools on your environment, and you were to open up Word, and you were to go to the Word document and click on the help file, that would actually trigger an alert. Because what's happening when you open up when you click on that help file is there's no embedded information in the program. What it's actually going to do is reach out to a web browser and take you to Microsoft's wiki page to where all of their help information is. In fact, what's going to happen in the background is you're going to run a PowerShell script that will open up the Edge web browser, and it will go to a specific URL, right? Well, the tool doesn't have any way of differentiating that, right? It just sees that action is taken, so it alerts you. So what we do with the Trusted Behavior Registry, this is what are all of the components of that alert that we can see. So, right, so what does that PowerShell script look like? Is it always the Edge browser that's opening? Does it go to a very specific page, a specific URL, or does it go to just some random Microsoft page, right, or some random other page? And so we can break that down if there's a signed binary associated with it. We can break all of that down and say, look, for this to be a Microsoft Word opening up its own wiki page, all of these things have to be in place. And if one of these factors change, then we're going to send it to human analysts to do an investigation. And of course, you may think, wow, that probably would be impossible to do because every program is going to set off thousands of alerts. How do you possibly keep up with that? And that's true. There are thousands of alerts that are unique to every single scenario and every different application out there. But here's the thing, 90% of the alerts that come across for the average customer come from the same tools, the same applications, the same processes, because we all use common tools, right? Most people are going to use Microsoft Outlook. Some people may use Gmail or some other mail, but they're all going to have, one of those common tools. Very few organizations are going to use a customized application for email or for word processing or Excel spreadsheets, that kind of thing, right? We're all using these common tools. So what we do is we can see these common tools and we can say, look, if this happens in Microsoft Word, it doesn't matter. It's independent of the environment, right? If this happens in Microsoft Word, we can verify that this is good behavior, right? And then what we're left with is about 9 to 10% of the alerts that come across that are going to be specific to your organization. So these are things that are going to be based around user behavior or what particular systems you might be using, different locations you use, how your team uses scripting, temporary behaviors. So it can be things like scanning or pen testing that you do. There's all kinds of things that would be unique to your organization, which would also include those, custom applications, custom development kind of things. And we can create trusted behavior registry entries for those as well. And what that does is that takes care of about 99% of all the alerts that come across. And that lets us just focus on what's really important, because we can say of those 99% alerts, we're closing them not because we think that they're false positives, but because we know they are, right? Because it's going through our trusted behavior registry. And then our SOC is going to be able to do that investigation. So the next piece that's important to talk about is what tools do we work with? So it's important to understand that we can't work with every tool in the market, because the first thing we have to be able to do is connect to it by an API connection. We also have to be able to get good information from that API connection, right? It has to be verbose. And we also have to have that two-way communication so that we can reach back into the platform to either take action or ask for more information. So these are the things that we work with. Now, if you look at the Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, there's an additional piece to that, and I probably should update this slide. I'm just not really sure where it would go, is we also work with Microsoft 365 Defender. And that's their kind of Microsoft Office suite Defender thing. So it covers things like identity, email, web services like MCAS, type of things. And so I think there's 4 additional components that go along with that, right? So any one of these tools or any combination of these tools, we can do that, look at your alerts, resolve all of them. And if you look at the endpoint tools, the Cortex, the Microsoft Sentinel, CrowdStrike, and so on, these are tools that also allow us to take action, right? So we don't have to wait that, time to go back and forth to say, what do we do, right? We can take action. So we can do things like maybe run a virus scan or isolate an endpoint or reset a password, a user password, right? Depending on what the tool allows, but each one of these tools will allow us to take some action in place there. So, with the other devices, we can't take action, but we can, resolve the alerts for you, right? So we do all of that through what we call our ZTAP platform. And this is the platform that our analysts use to do those investigations, to keep up with, the process and all of that. And all of this is available to a client, right? So we're going to take care of it for you. We're going to resolve your alerts. We're going to, take action, and you get to choose how we take action or when we take action, right? We're going to do all of that, but it's all 100% transparency. There's no black box. You can always see what we do, why we do it, and how we do it. If you want to know, hey, what was the indicator of compromise that actually triggered this alert? That's going to be information that's in the platform. If you want to say, hey, this alert was resolved, this trusted behavior, what does the trusted behavior registry entry look like that said this is trusted behavior, right? You can do all of that. It's all available to you. But we also realize that most clients aren't going to focus on that. So we want to be able to provide a quick and easy way that you, as the customer, can get the specific information that you need, right? The what was observed, what is the risk, what's the requirements, what do we do? What needs to be, what action needs to be taken here? And so we've created this mobile SOC that has the same information as the ZTAP platform. It's just formatted in a way that with just a couple simple clicks, you are able to get right into what's happened and what needs to be done. And so that is part of the service that comes with it. One of the questions, there's no metering with the number of alerts. We base it on the number of endpoints or the ingest from the SIM. And so we're going to resolve all of those alerts. There's never going to be a point where we say, hey, you've had too many alerts this month, so we're going to have to shut you down for the rest of the month, right? So these are just some screenshots of the mobile app. Now, the last piece I really want to emphasize before we get to kind of the Q&A piece of it is our SOC, right? Because that's an important piece of what we do. Our trusted behavior registry is going to resolve alerts, but we also have a SOC that's going to investigate and potentially take action for you, right? So who is our SOC? Well, if you go to any organization worth the darn, they're going to say, well, we're 24/7, 365, we're SOC 2 type 2 compliant, right? If they're not, run away. However, what we have is a little bit better than that. So for instance, up in the top right, in the white section, you see we have a 99% employee retention. I think this slide needs to be updated. I think it's down to 98 now, and that's over like the last 6 years. And there's a couple reasons for that, and the reasons are pretty clearly spelled out on the slide. And what you see is when we bring someone in, we are going to provide them with training, with 200 hours of training. And some of that will be self-directed, some of it will be classroom taught, and some of it will be, you know, hands-on lab type training. And they're going to get that training, and they're going to have to pass landmarks each time before they move up in the training. And so they have to prove themselves, through that training process before we put them in the SOC. I started off, my first job in cybersecurity was in a SOC. I was hired and I went through like 5 days of orientation, none of which had anything to do with SOC or training. And then I was immediately put in the SOC they gave me a new computer. They sent me to the SOC. I went into the SOC. I signed in. The guy next to me says, "Hey, do you have this tool? Do you have access to this? Do you have access?" And I got all my access. And then they said, "All right, we're going to start sending you phone calls." And I had no idea what I was doing. It took me months before I started to slightly feel comfortable in my job, that I wasn't making mistakes. In fact, my boss at the time, who ended up becoming a good friend of mine, guy by the name of Mark Matthews, he said there was one point where we were considering letting you go because you weren't performing the way we expected you to perform. But luckily, I dug my heels in. I would go home at night. I would read. I would study. I would search the internet for, videos that I could watch, anything I could do to train myself, because I got no training from that company. We don't do that to our people. We train them. And one of the things that does, obviously, is gives them a lot of security in the job, a lot of excitement about the job. They know what they're doing. They come in excited to do it. And then the other obvious thing is that our guys aren't dealing with false positives all day long. When I was in the SOC, the majority of investigations that I would do would be either false positives or trying to explain something to a customer that, why we took a certain action, because it was all black box and you really couldn't figure it out. Right. And so it was horrible, but these guys get to focus on real threats, and they get to focus on situations where, clients need help. And so they get a lot of fulfillment out of their job. It's exciting. And then, of course, they also have the ability to move up through the company, to grow in their career. And with a company that's growing, and an organization that says, "Hey, here's some clear paths. Here's some ways that you can get to the next level." It really makes it, a great job for them. And that's why we have that high retention rate. And the last piece I'll say about this slide is the contractual SLA. Now, if you've talked to any MDR vendors out there, anybody, they're going to say, "Well, we have a 1-hour SLA." And you go, "Okay, well, that sounds good." Excuse me 1 second. I feel like I'm going to sneeze. Okay. So you say, "That sounds good. Well, what does that mean?" He says, "Well, when we get that alert, we'll investigate, and within an hour, we'll give you the results, or we'll take an action for you." And you go, "Okay, well, that sounds really good." But when you deep dive into that SLA, what you find is one, it's almost impossible to figure out whether they've met the SLA or not. They're the ones that are keeping track of it, and they will fudge the numbers. Or two, the SLA is only about the time that they spend trying to figure out what happened, and doesn't have anything to do with the time that the alert sat in the queue before they pick it up. And we think that's terrible. So we have an SLA, and this is not an SLO where it's our goal to try to meet this. This is actually money on the line, a time to detect and time to respond. And so what that means is when that device triggers the alert, we have 1 hour to pick that alert up and then to do that investigation, right? And that's money on the line. It's not just a pipe dream or a goal. This is actually what we do. And we always put that number front and center in your environment so that you can see that anytime. You just go log into the ZTAP platform. It's right there. It tells you how we're doing. So that's always available to you. And I think this is a real important piece of it, because the goal of why you're spending money is, and this is like Chad said, right, is not to be compliance. Compliance is not security. So we want you to spend your money in an effective way. And so we've created this environment for that purposes. So that is the bulk of my presentation. So do we have any questions? I'll throw it back to Stephen. I think we probably still have plenty of time left.
Hey, thanks, Carrie. And thanks for a great presentation from both you and Chad there. We didn't have any questions today, but I will say, guys, you saw that at the end of Carrie's slides there. Check out criticalstart.com. It obviously talks a lot about our MDR solution, but we also have a great section that just keeps people up to date on threats. So some of the things that Chad was talking about, we update not only our customers, but anybody who wants to go to our website on threats. There's something, for example, on the Okta breach just from, I believe that was last week. So that's a great source of information. You'll all get